Where does your water come from?
At the oceans and rivers. Treated water from the riverside.
St. John's.
Natural springs.
Hopefully from the city, I think.
I know it comes from the aquifer.
An aquifer, I believe.
It's a simple fact. Most of us never consider where the water we drink and use every day comes from. Water is just taken for granted. In fact, a recent survey suggests that more than half of all residents in Northeast and Central Florida don't know the origin of the water they use. Even with the abundance of water in Florida, fresh water is not unlimited. To find out how the choices we make today influence what our water future will be, it's time to take a look at simple truths about our water.
When was the last time you really thought about water?
You know what? Every now and then it crosses my mind.
Every time I'm thirsty.
How long have you been asking me questions? That's about as long as I've thought about water.
I don't think about it a lot.
A lot.
Honestly, not that often.
Not really, unless, I'm using it.
Most of us never really think about water. We always expect it to be there when we need it, and it usually is. But consider this. Most of the water on Earth is salt water, actually 97%. That means only 3% of the Earth's water is fresh, but 2% is locked in polar and glacial ice, leaving only 1% that is fresh, accessible, and generally ready for use. 1%. At present, about 90% of water used in Northeast and Central Florida is from the deep underground Floridan aquifer system. The purity of this water means that very little treatment is required before it is pumped into a community's water system. While water from the aquifer has been both abundant and affordable, increasing demands are straining it as our principal water source. Since 1995, Northeast and Central Florida's population has grown by 37%. And while growth has slowed, population is still expected to grow by another 32% by the year 2030. That's more than 200 people in our region added every single day. While our population grew, so did the size of our houses, our lawns, and the green spaces surrounding apartment, condominium, and commercial properties. That's meant more water use. Today, the average homeowner in Northeast and Central Florida uses almost as much water to irrigate lawns and landscapes than for all other home uses combined. Plus, projected future demand means that additional sources of water will likely be needed. The Floridan aquifer's underground network of caves and small pockets contain vast quantities of water. Its geological structure includes hard rock that channels water through deep cracks and fissures, and sponge-like rock that absorb water. Together, they make the aquifer a natural wonder at storing water. To understand how the system works, scientists bore into the aquifer's rock structure and study core samples. Brian McGurk is a hydrologist with the St. Johns River Water Management District, the state agency responsible for managing our region's water supply. He explains how the aquifer's rock structure holds and channels water.
This is a rock core sample. Some of the rock in the aquifer is porous and can transmit water through the pores in between the tiny little particles that makes up the rock. So some rock doesn't have pores and it's very tight. However, it's cracked and water can travel through these cracks and these what we call secondary porosity openings in the rock.
On average, our region gets about 54 inches of rain each year. But because of evaporation and runoff into waterways, only a small portion makes its way into the aquifer. While rain is the primary way the aquifer is replenished, the green portions of this map show the limited areas where rain can most easily get through the confining rock layers to recharge the aquifer. In many locations, the underground rock structure prevents water from reaching the Floridan aquifer. When we use more water than rainfall can replace, pressures within the aquifer structure change, and, just like a sponge, it pulls water from whatever source is around it. lower-level saltwater can be drawn up into the aquifer's freshwater layers, making them brackish, requiring treatment to remove salts to make the water safe for human consumption. The aquifer can also draw down water from rivers, lakes, and streams, which may reduce lake levels and spring flows and potentially deplete aquatic habitats and wetlands. Wetlands are delicate ecosystems that are home to a number of plant and animal species, and in many cases are breeding grounds for fish and shellfish that are important food sources for humans. When too much water is pumped from the aquifer by wells close to wetlands, the wetlands themselves can suffer. Willaca State Forest in northeast Florida is home to a variety of wetlands.
Behind us we have a swamp forest. Swamps are forested wetlands, and this particular one is dominated mostly by cypress trees. There's also some swamp tupelo and some maple trees, red maple trees in here, as well as various shrubs. And this is a pretty typical wetland found throughout Florida and much of the southeast. Nutrients will flow into wetlands from runoff from the surrounding uplands, and wetlands absorb nutrients. So they're very important for cleaning water. But when we have a drought with lots of pumping going on, that water table can go many feet below that, and that would allow soil losses here. You'll lose wetland species out of here. The animals that are dependent on breeding in a swamp like this may not have any water at all for years. There's thousands of lakes here, and those are all ancient sinkhole features. As such, then, it's a direct connection to the Floridan aquifer. The groundwater pumping effects can be dramatic in some places, a complete change in the swamp. The trees would die, fall over, and upland species would invade, and just lack of water. You need water in the wetland.
Freshwater springs also give us a glimpse into the health of the aquifer. Central and northeast Florida are home to the largest number of freshwater springs in the world. At Central Florida's Blue Spring, the St. Johns River is fed by water that literally bubbles from an opening in the aquifer known as a boil. The Spring Run, a channel from the boil to the river, teems with wildlife and at a constant 73 degrees is a popular winter retreat for manatees seeking warm water. The United States Geological Survey has monitored water flows from Blue Spring since the 1930s, and that data is used to ensure that water pumped from the aquifer nearby is not significantly impacting its flow. Corey Mentor, a hydrologic technician with the USGS, says Blue Spring is important to study.
This is an important site because it's a well-known spring. It discharges a lot of water, and it's in a populated area now. Today, the spring is flowing at about 1,100 gallons per second, or 100 million gallons per day into the St. Johns River. The environmental impacts that you would see if the water level dropped, you would see the flows decrease, you would see the water levels drop in the river, and you would also see the environment suffer and animals leave the area. And it is very important to monitor because of all the people that have come to the area.
Data collected here is just some of the critical information gathered throughout our region that scientists analyze to ensure that unacceptable impacts do not occur as a result of water being drawn from the aquifer. The data includes minimum flows and levels, which determine the amount and rate of water flow needed to protect the ecosystem.
Minimum flows and levels are required by the laws of the state of Florida to protect the natural resources of the state. It can be from navigation, boating, the protection of an ecological system, or the protection of animals and species within that ecological system. The one species in particular here at Blue Springs that's of concern to us and to the state of Florida is manatees. They use Blue Springs for a thermal refuge from the cold waters of the St. Johns River during the winter months, roughly from November to April. That groundwater head is what drives the spring flow. So if the groundwater head is reduced or brought down by one activity or another, then the flows in the springs will tend to decline. So if there's a lot of pumping from the aquifer, then the groundwater levels will decline, the spring flows will decline. What type of options do we have here? If our primary source of water supply now is the Floridan aquifer, then we start to have to look at what our other water supply options are, and we have to look at all of them.
Science tells us that taking more water from the aquifer than can be naturally replaced can cause salt water to intrude into freshwater layers, reducing available supply. And we know that excessive pumping can reduce water levels in lakes and rivers and harm delicate ecosystems like wetlands and springs. Which brings us to simple truth number 1. Pumping too much groundwater causes unacceptable damage to both the environment and to our drinking water source. Fortunately, there is a two-part solution. Conservation is the first and most important option. Using water more efficiently, using less water than we do now, delays or reduces the amount we need from other sources. But conservation alone may not be enough, so we need to seek alternatives now.
Where do you think we should get our water from?
Probably wells.
Probably natural springs, or if we had like rainwater, like recycled rainwater.
Desalination.
I believe it should come from St. John's River as well as some surrounding lakes.
The aquifer. I have no idea.
Which additional water sources we can tap into depends on what is most readily available in a particular area, the level and cost of treatment it requires, and the distance it travels from the pumping and treatment facilities to a community's water mains. In our region, we have several alternatives. Most people in the United States get water from lakes, rivers, and reservoirs. In fact, some of America's largest cities, from New York to Atlanta to Dallas and Phoenix, are supplied almost entirely by these sources, while much of the drinking water in our region comes from the aquifer. Some of our communities have relied on lakes and rivers for decades. This is Lake Washington, one of the many lakes that form the St. Johns River on its 310-mile journey north. Lake Washington, more than 4,000 acres in size, is the main water supply for some 150,000 people living in the city of Melbourne and other parts of Brevard County. Harold Nance is Assistant Public Works and Utilities Director for the city of Melbourne.
In 1959, we put this facility out here to treat water out of the lake because we needed more water. Growth was causing some problems with the wells in the area. And it's a good source, it's an abundant source, and it was easily treatable with the conventional process technologies that were available at the time. The pipe behind us is the 36-inch raw water main that comes in from Lake Washington, the St. Johns River. It transports the water that comes in here. We usually withdraw about 11 or 12 million gallons a day from the lake itself.
And the city is able to provide affordable water.
I believe our rates that we charge our customers are very comparable to other utilities in the area and in our county. I think we're very comparable in that regard. Our quality, I'd stack up against pretty much anybody.
Part of the city's water infrastructure is a weir, situated at the north end of the lake. The initial structure, built nearly 40 years ago, has been replaced by this concrete structure. The weir holds some water back in Lake Washington for the city's water supply, while also allowing adequate water to flow downstream to the north.
We have actually also done a minimum flows and level study for this section of the river, and as a part of that study, we've incorporated certain features in this particular weir that the old weir, the sheep pie weir, did not have, whereas there are some openings close to the bottom where we can maintain a minimum flow that flows through the weir even when the top of the water is below the crest elevation of the weir. So we're maintaining a certain amount of flow downstream for the ecological benefit of the river, but yet we're also providing the volume within the lake for withdrawal. Well, we have a water level monitoring stations throughout the entire upper St. Johns River Basin. This is just one location where we monitor the water levels. We have 2 recording devices, one upstream and one downstream. And then that data is radioed back to the district so that we can have an idea of, actually we get real-time data that way, where we can go onto the system and actually see what the water levels at this location are at any given time. Collecting this data really is of paramount importance in what we do and the decisions that we make for water management.
Other communities also use surface water to supplement the water drawn from the aquifer. The city of Cocoa, for example, gets about a third of its daily needs from the Taylor Creek Reservoir. And other cities are studying the potential use of surface water in the future. In some parts of northeast and central Florida, brackish groundwater can be developed as another alternative source of water. Brackish groundwater is found in some underground pockets where salt water has mixed with fresh water. To be usable, salt and other minerals need to be removed. Typically, it goes through a filtration process called reverse osmosis. Reverse osmosis, or RO as it's known, uses pressure to remove salts, minerals, heavy metals, and other particles from the salty water through extremely fine filters with pores as small as 1 micron, about 1/100,000th the thickness of a human hair. The city of Melbourne supplements its water from Lake Washington with brackish groundwater treated through reverse osmosis. The process is highly complex and ultimately produces pure water.
Right now we have 4 groundwater wells that are used for potable water production. They're approximately 650 to 900 feet deep. We use 2 at a time. Each of them puts out about 3 million gallons a day to feed our RO plant. We have a 2-stage process, 48 pressure vessels in the first, 24 in the second. Again, one of the things we do is we capture the concentrate, or the byproduct of the process, from our first stage and recycle it back through the second stage to get as much potable water out of it as we can. The RO quality, the permeate coming out of that plant, basically has nothing in it. It's very low in everything. It's almost distilled water. They hear concentrate, they hear byproduct, they hear brine, which it's all been called, and they, for some reason, when I've talked with them, they have this concept that it's a brown molasses-like substance. And of course, that's not really the case. It's really just raw water out of the ground that's had some of the constituents itself, very small, you can't see, concentrated in it.
Treated brackish groundwater is proving to be a viable fresh water source in other communities as well. St. Johns County, for example, has supplemented its aquifer withdrawals with brackish groundwater since 2006. Presently, their system produces an average of 5 million gallons of fresh water per day. For some communities, a plentiful supply of fresh water may originate in the ocean. According to the United States Geological Survey, more than 12,500 desalination facilities operate around the world. Like converting brackish groundwater, desalination typically uses the reverse osmosis method to separate salts from fresh water. Florida and California lead the United States in desalination systems, and presently, the largest facility in the country is operated by Tampa Bay Water. It alone produces some 25 million gallons of fresh water every day. Some local governments in our region have desalination on their radar to use for future water supply. In fact, the city of Palm Coast and some partner governments are jointly studying the feasibility of building and operating a desalination facility. Another alternative source of water, known as reclaimed water or reuse water, involves cleaning and reusing wastewater from homes and businesses. Using reclaimed water to irrigate residential lawns, parks, and other public areas significantly reduces the amount of water that needs to be pumped from the aquifer or taken from other sources. A leader in the use of reclaimed water is the city of Altamont Springs.
The reuse system in Altamont Springs covers 98% of the residences and businesses within the city. And in 1984, they started construction, which lasted about 10 years. We went into not only the new neighborhoods, but we retrofit into the old neighborhoods. And in 1989, we turned the valve. We opened up the reclaim system to about half of the city. And over the next 6 years, till 1995, the rest of the system was developed. So we were fully operational in 1995. We were typically pumping about 13 million gallons of groundwater, drinkable water, through our system to not only provide water for inside the house, but to water yards and to wash cars and whatever else is done. And the system has cut that in half. Now we only pump about 6.5 million gallons of groundwater a day to our system for potable use. And the other 6.5 million is reuse water that's almost entirely going out onto the yards. When we first put the system in, we got a lot of opposition from the citizens. Many of them thought that using the reclaimed water would make them sick or make their hair fall out. And in our system, it's treated to a point that it's actually drinkable. The only problem with drinking the water is it's got nutrients in it, like nitrogen and phosphorus. And so it doesn't meet DEP standards for drinking water. The water is actually very good for the yards because it has the same ingredients that many fertilizers do, nitrogen and phosphorus. The complaints that we get out of the system now are that we don't have enough water for them to irrigate and water their lawns as much as they want.
The reclaimed water system in Altamont Springs has cut in half the city's need to pump water from the aquifer. Plus, on average, customers save about $1,200 a year in reduced water costs.
We were a forerunner in the use of reclaimed in the state of Florida, and it has benefited not only the citizens but the businesses in the area to such a large extent it's almost impossible to identify how much it has saved. This is something that should be done statewide. Hopefully other cities will follow suit and they will develop their systems as completely as we have to support billion-dollar process systems for taking either surface water, seawater, or some other method to augment their systems. That's something that we have been able to avoid entirely here in the city of Altamont Springs.
Excess reclaimed water from Altamont Springs system is pumped into Cranes Roost Lake.
Cranes Roost was built as a borrow pit for the construction of Interstate 4 in the early 1960s. It was a hole in the ground that was essentially doing nothing. And the city, through this project as well as others, has turned that borrow pit into a lake, which becomes the center point of the city. In the past 5 years, we've been able to utilize that lake as a storage and retrieval mechanism for the reclaimed water.
In our region, other communities are also finding success with reclaimed water programs and getting strong acceptance from users.
Actually, we moved here from New Jersey about 4 years ago. In New Jersey, we did not have reclaimed water in the area that we were living in. And to be honest with you, I don't think I've really ever heard of it until we moved to Florida. And we saw the little signs at the beginning of the neighborhoods and kind of researched because we do have children, so we wanted to know a little bit about the reclaimed water. And we really don't notice a difference compared to, the water in New Jersey, other than the water bill is cheaper here. I think it's great. It helps to save the environment. And when I look around, the lawns all seem very healthy and green. And I would think that the reclaimed water has in it is very good, like a natural fertilizer.
That brings us to simple truth number 2. Diversifying water sources helps ensure an adequate, affordable supply in the future.
What do you do to conserve water?
You only water twice a week. If it rains during the week, I turn my sprinkler system off.
Make sure I run the dishwasher full.
Just make sure faucets are turned off.
I don't run the dishwasher if I don't have to.
Don't leave faucets running.
Obeying the water restrictions on the lawn. I turn off the water when I'm brushing my teeth.
Do full loads in the laundry.
Could be better educated, I guess.
It's a simple equation. Use less water, and less water has to be taken from any source. That simple idea is key to shaping our region's water future. There are a number of easy things you can do every day to save water. Outside of homes, we should all follow mandatory lawn watering restrictions. Water only on designated days and only before 10 a.m. or after 4 p.m. And we can skip watering altogether when soil is moist or when rain is in the forecast. Remember, over-watering lawns promotes weeds, insect pests, and shallow root growth that makes your grass less tolerant of dry conditions. We can all do better by showing grass some tough love and giving it only as much water as it needs. Plant the right plant in the right place in your yard. Make sure the plants you choose are suitable for our region and encourage your neighbors to do the same. Indoors, we also have easy ways to save water, like only washing full loads of dishes and clothes, not running faucets unused, repairing leaky toilets, and using low-flow devices like faucet aerators and shower heads. And when replacing appliances and plumbing fixtures, look for water-efficient options like those with a WaterSense label. All of this brings us to simple truth number 3. When we all do our part, we can save a lot of water. Protecting our area's water resources is really about changing our relationship with water. We need to think about how much we use and about how we use it. Water is here for us all to share, but its future, where we get it from, and how much it costs will be determined by the decisions we make today. And that's the simple truth about our water.